federal judge has put Maine's law requiring a 72-hour waiting period for gun purchases on hold. A district court judge came to that decision earlier today. Governor Janet Mills allowed the law to take effect without her signature. Since then, groups like the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine and Gun Owners of Maine have challenged that law. In a statement, the director of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine says the group is pleased but cautious about the next steps. Members of the Gun Safety Coalition say they're troubled by the ruling, but are confident the state will appeal. Analyst Phil Hirschkorn is joining us to take a closer look at the judge's decision and what happens next. Phil, this was an entire segment in our documentary after the Lewiston mass shooting. So tell us a little bit about, remind us what the law is and where things stand now.
Right, as we reported in the documentary, Lewiston, What Went Wrong, which people can still watch on your website. The idea was to prevent homicides, but mostly suicides, that were coming after what were called impulsive gun purchases. So the idea was 3 days would be a cooling off period if you were having a mental health crisis or experiencing some sort of rage, and that would reduce gun violence. And again, after Lewiston, legislators wanted to do something to stop gun violence. They didn't go for an assault weapons ban. They did tweak the yellow flag law to make that easier for law enforcement. But this passed by just one vote in the House and Senate in 2024 after failing to pass in 2023. But immediately opponents said this was unconstitutional and it infringed on their Second Amendment rights, and the judge saw it that way today.
That's the question I think a lot of people want to know. Why did the judge side with the pro-gun plaintiffs?
So the judge is U.S. District Judge Lance Walker, appointed in 2018 by President Trump, now the chief federal judge in Maine. And he heard our oral arguments just 2 days ago in Portland Federal Court. He said that the law temporarily bans keeping, bearing, and carrying a gun for 72 hours. And he called that indiscriminate dispossession, plain and simple. In other words, you have to remember what the Second Amendment says, right? The right to bear arms shall not be infringed, to keep and bear arms. That's the key phrase. And so Walker rejected the state's argument, which basically said that to acquire a gun, there's a distinction between acquiring and buying a gun and possessing a gun. And here's the key quote, in my opinion: because the act of acquiring a firearm, including by purchase, falls within the ambit of what it means to keep and bear arms, it is presumptively protected by the Second Amendment. So look, we've had waiting periods in this country for a long, long time. The national waiting period that people are familiar with is now instant. But when it passed in 1993 by Congress and President Bill Clinton signed it, it was 5 days. It took time for the FBI and computers to catch up to make it what it is. So Maine's law is problematic to opponents because it was a post-background check waiting period. And that's why they felt it was infringing on their rights. You have a plaintiff who's a domestic violence survivor who said, as others argued, like in our documentary, this infringes on the right to self-defense. You even had gun sellers who are plaintiffs saying, we've been hurt economically. Gun sales are down. People can't, on their way to hunting in the Maine woods, can't grab their rifle and go. This is a really big problem. The judge said in the end that this law, the thinking of the backers of the law, while they have admirable motives, they put in their assumptions the behavior of the aberrant few, in his words, over the law-abiding many.
Where we're stuck now is this law that was passed in August, or went into law, when it became law in August, is now essentially on hold. So what happens next? Are there more court procedures here?
Probably. Right now, the ball is in the court of the Attorney General, Aaron Frey, who defended the law so far unsuccessfully. This is injunction. We have to find out, we're waiting to hear if he will appeal this injunction. Then there could be a full trial, all the evidence, all the studies, all the experts on the merits of the law in court. We don't know whether that will happen. Sometimes disputes over state law are settled outside of court. Keep in mind, Maine's not the only state with this kind of law. There are other states like Colorado, Vermont, New Mexico that have similar types of waiting periods that have been upheld by federal judges. Like a lot of laws, especially the gun laws, you get differing decisions in different jurisdictions, and ultimately sometimes they make their way all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Hunting, sportsmen's activities, a big factor here in Maine. It'll be interesting to see what happens as this goes forward in the courts. Phil, thanks for your time.